To show you how important elected officials feel it is to have this connection with all of you, we have people from local water districts, the port district, from school districts, from the county school districts. We have the county sheriff, superintendent of schools, from city councils, from the county board of supervisors. I mean, we have a lot of elected officials here for you today to ask questions of, and if you don't get a good chance to talk to us at the breakout sessions, a number of us will be here during the lunch, and we'd definitely encourage you to feel free to come up and talk to us whenever you would like to. We also have a pledge to vote card inside of your folder, and we have our clerk head of elections here, Gail Pellerin, who is here to not only just pre-register you, but we want to make sure that you will pledge to vote in future elections and upcoming elections. As you probably know, state law has changed, and you can actually pre-register to vote even before you turn 18. And I got to say, if you have been paying attention at all at the local, state, or national level, I think now is the most important time to have your voice included in the way that this country is going to go, because this is the country that you are inheriting. And we want to make sure that you have a strong voice in that future. And I have a great honor today of introducing our keynote speaker. And I'd like to start by saying that I believe that every member of the stage here would agree with this, which is that if you could choose a time and a place to be and to live, you would choose to be in this region, in this county, right now. This area, right now, is doing more on innovation, more on inclusion, more on technology, more on cancer research, more on things that are going to fundamentally change the trajectory of people's lives for the better than any other region in the United States, and is falling squarely on all of you and your time in the place that you are right now. A lot of times you'll hear people say it's your future, but I would argue actually it's your right now that has the opportunity to do things that even our generations could not do. This is a very, very unique time that we're living in, but you've been given an unbelievable set of gifts and responsibility to be right here in this region right now. And the fact that you're here today, I know means that you're taking it seriously, but I want you to understand that it's a significant privilege to live in this region, and we have a lot of responsibility to help lead, in many respects, the country and the world with the gifts that we've been given in this area. And one of the people that has, for 40 years in this region, been a remarkable innovator is our keynote speaker today, Secretary John Laird. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about him. There is a bio inside your packet, but I think from a more human touch, let me just say that Secretary Laird has done more on innovation and breakthroughs, from being the first openly gay mayor in the United States, to being an elected official at the state, the community college, the community at the city level, to some of the bills that he has authored in the state legislature, over 80 of them which became law, that have done remarkable things for water conservation, for climate change, for making sure that there's equality and diversity throughout the state workforce and that people are represented. You know, there's a real legacy here that Secretary Laird has and continues to have as Secretary of Natural Resources right now, appointed by Governor Brown in 2011. But don't ever question whether or not public service can make a difference, because Secretary Laird is an embodiment of that. A lot of things that are good about this community are because of people like Secretary Laird really made sure to take a leadership role in it. I'm honored to introduce him. I think that we should all be honored that he's our keynote speaker. Please welcome Secretary of Natural Resources, John Laird.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to see you are wide awake, because this is an exciting gathering, and the fact that you're here is very special, and I want to, in a moment, tell you why. First, though, I just want to acknowledge that this is one of the most amazing arrays of local elected and appointed officials that you will see, people from every jurisdiction. And through the day, you should really take the advantage to get to know them and learn from them, because I think they have a lot to offer, and you're the ones that are going to have to do the heavy lifting over the next 40 years. And I think what I wanted to talk about in sort of the common theme is our democracy constantly has to be regenerated. It is not something that is a given. And at the same time, it's you. There's plenty of reasons to think it's somebody else, but it is really you. And if you just put yourself where I was when I was your age, I was wondering what the opportunities were going to be. I was wondering if I could make a difference. And I have to tell you that when I was 17, I was an exchange student, and I lived in Spain for a summer. And it was at a time that it was a military dictatorship, and it was a shock to my system. The family I lived with had books that had to be in brown paper wrappers so people would not know that they had these books and that they were reading. You took a train, and there was somebody with a submachine gun on every car. My link to the outside world was this English language newspaper that came in from Paris every day, and a few days it just wasn't there, and I wrote them, and they wrote back and said, well, here's the article that the government found offensive that led to them not allowing that newspaper in Spain today. And so it gave me an appreciation for the fact that I could speak freely, influence the outcome of things, not be worried about what I read or wrote or said in public, that I felt safe in a different way. And also, those were Jurassic times compared to what you're in now. And so it wasn't until I was just past my 21st birthday that the voting age was changed from 21 to 18. And so I could not vote when I was 18. My father, who was a high school teacher, did a wonderful thing. He knew I was working on election campaigns, and he said, I'm going to give you my vote. You just tell me how to vote. And it's not fair. You should be able to be doing it. If you're old enough to go into the military and die for the country, you ought to be able to have the right to vote. And then naturally, I voted in one school board election the minute I turned 21, and they changed the age to 18. So you should appreciate that as something that you have a right to. A couple of the other things in sort of a random order is that there's this great scene. If you have ever seen the movie Dave, Kevin Kline sort of plays this guy that's a substitute president. Ben Kingsley is the vice president. And they have this private talk when the president asked the vice president what got him first involved in politics. And he talked about just sort of living in his town, struggling to make a living, and realizing that that was sort of a way that you could make change, in that he was good at it and he could bring people together. And I used to, when I was a city council member and a mayor, I'd love to go to the League of Cities, and I'd love to ask other people, what got you involved? What made you run or get involved the first time? And a friend of mine who was the mayor of Laguna Beach said, it was a tree in my neighborhood. They were going to take down a big tree. I had to find out where City Hall was. I had to go get involved. Well, that tree's still there, and I'm the mayor. And there were a whole host of stories like that. There were women that didn't like police responses to domestic violence calls. There were people that didn't like things in their neighborhood. They sort of were drawn in by something that was going on that motivated them, that caused them to then get involved. Exactly where you are right now, and the ticket is exactly what motivates you is something that you should choose to act on. I also tell the story that when I was a student at UCSC, they gave you a chance to write an undergraduate thesis, which doesn't seem like something you'd rush to do, but I did. And I wrote it on the history of water development in California. And I thought, geez, I'm from a coastal area, and water policy is being decided by the Central Valley and Southern California. I'm a bit of an environmentalist, and enviros aren't really welcomed into the group of water officials. I'll never have a chance to influence this. And now I am the point person for water in the state of California for the governor. You know. There's also a message you don't like, which is pay attention to what you're studying because you might be in charge of it someday. But that is really the opportunity that you have. You have the opportunity to learn, inform yourself, organize, get involved, and change things. And it's not an opportunity that exists in a lot of places in the world. And even though we're talking about civic engagement, it's not always in electoral politics. It's in Santa Cruz. There was a time, amazingly, over 3 decades ago, when some of us just didn't like what banks were doing. You had no control over who got loans, whether money stayed in the community or moved out, and we decided we would form a community credit union that would be one person, one vote, that would make loans that weren't usually made, and it was hard. It was hard to start that from scratch and raise the capital. But it has over 15,000 members now. It has over $100 million in assets. There's businesses across Santa Cruz that got loans that wouldn't have started without it. There's people that have credit that wouldn't have credit without it. And it was a bunch of people just deciding that we could make a difference, we could do something, we could change it. And when the HIV epidemic started, it was the same thing. There was not a lot of organizing going on. There wasn't public education. There weren't people speaking out for the issues. And a few of us organized, started the local AIDS service agency, the Santa Cruz AIDS Project. And I was executive director at a point that we had 200 clients, 600 regular volunteers. We were mobilizing the community in a way that made a fundamental difference when that happened. We had one that wasn't quite as successful. We formed a child care council to raise money because child care provides the ability for some people to work, some people to make more of themselves. We couldn't make that go over time with the amount of money needed, but it did do some things that pooled resources and made a difference. And what it really is figure out what it is that is a community need, pick an issue, and go for it. And when you look at elected things, there's so many ways that working with elected officials or seeking elected office, organizing for something can make a fundamental difference. You live in a county, and believe me, I am all over the state every week. And you know, last week I was speaking in Orange County. You wouldn't run into anybody on the street you knew. You couldn't influence it in quite the same way. Here you can, because you have access to officials. You go downtown and you run into people you know. There's real community organization. That gives you the opportunity to get involved and make a fundamental difference. And as an elected official, that was powerful. Whether it was parks that existed because neighbors asked for them, or a trail up an arroyo that we made sure happened, or services for seniors because they just weren't being delivered and there was a chance to make a difference and mobilize community effort. That is your opportunity. And I thought I would sort of be personal in another way. As Zach mentioned, that I was really in that first class of openly gay mayors in the country, and believe me, that was 1983. I think there were 10 or 12 openly gay elected officials in the entire United States at the time. It was never a decision about whether to be gay, I'm gay. It was a decision about whether to be clear about it and whether to organize openly. And you get asked a lot of times about wanting a major change. I mean, right now you have a chance to influence immigration issues or healthcare issues or some of the things that are very present in our time. But with that, when I graduated from college, it was still illegal to be gay in almost all the 50 states. When I graduated from college, it wasn't an openly gay elected official in the United States. It was a different time and place. And when I saw the movie Milk, which I avoided seeing for a long time because I knew the ending, and a lot of my friends were his friends and were around him, I was sort of stunned with one takeaway. I had forgot how powerless we were in that era. He had to organize so that whenever the police would go in and raid bars, there would be a community response to try to protect people. I had forgotten that was the case. And one of the first organizing things we did here in this community is the police department in Capitola did undercover arrests of gay people in the beach area. And we decided that we weren't going to, let it go unanswered. And we organized. We organized with the newspaper that printed the home addresses of everybody that was arrested. We organized with the city council members. We took 200 people down to a city council meeting, and we were the oral communications for that city council meeting. One of the things that is a dangerous thing to learn that everybody's wishing I wouldn't tell you about right now that's sitting up here is that you can turn oral communications into a great rally if you really have an issue that you want to press that has solid community backing, which is sometimes the difference between some of the people that come to oral communications. And we had a speaker from the Gray Panthers and a speaker from the ACLU and from Democratic clubs and from Capitola organizations that really made the issue in a good way. And if you looked around the room, for the first time, there was a group of people that felt excluded from the public process that realized they had some power. And if they mobilized together, they could make a difference. And so they got involved in elections. And it was in Santa Cruz County, in Santa Cruz City, and the Santa Cruz transit system. They're among the very first governments in the entire United States to offer domestic partners benefits, to recognize that there were families that might be different than were recognized by the law. And it just kept going. We even organized and said, this shouldn't be just about gay couples. If there are straight couples that for whatever reason can't marry, they should, under the penalty of perjury, get these same benefits. And when I went to the legislature, I did do a bill that fixed that and helped with that in terms of benefits. And then in the legislature, we extended it statewide, and we also voted for marriage. And then the Supreme Court does marriage. And I went from a time that it was against the law to be gay in all 50 states to a time that I'm legally married and my marriage is recognized by state and federal government because of the organizing and the incremental change that we did all the way along in that. And I don't recognize it's always easy. The interesting thing there is I knew we were right, but I had no idea if we were on the right side of history. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I got invited to the White House and got an award as a champion of change. And that's when I thought we are now on the right side of history as well. And believe me, it wasn't easy for my family. And this is why when you talk about change, you're really working with your family, your friends, your community, the whole business. I like to tell the story now that 35 years ago when I was a huge media event for becoming, an early openly gay mayor, it never occurred to me that my parents hadn't told all their friends that they had 2 gay sons. And so I'm suddenly beaming in on every TV station into their community. And one of my brothers calls and says, it's kind of like a funeral around here. People are bringing casseroles. And yet my mother, who was a grade school teacher, started getting letters from her friends saying they had snickered at Harvey Milk and people in San Francisco, and I know you, I know your husband, I know your son at home, very loving people, a great family. Clearly this son came from that. I'm going to have to reconsider how I think about this. And that is the message and the lesson of how one person in an individual act, in just a daily basis, not considering yourself like out on the front lines of something in a big group, makes fundamental change. And so now, you know, when there were some other amazing things when I graduated from college. There had never, Bruce McPherson is here. He sat in a state senate that had a number of women when he was in the state senate. But when I graduated from college, 122 years into statehood in California, there had never been a woman that served in the California State Senate. That really changed. You know, we thought in our dreams an African-American man or woman could be elected president, and I lived to see it. And so there were fundamental changes that came from people in our generation, but now it gets turned to you. I mean, there were even, one of the things we all used to joke about is 40 years ago, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland was so polluted that it regularly caught on fire. The river would just burn. And it led to the Clean Water Act, at the same time the Clean Air Act, and while there's still major problems in different parts of the country, it is better because of that effort that was made. And so as it gets turned over to you right now, we really have a changing climate where unless we take action, we're not going to leave a better place for your kids and your grandkids. And while individually you change your own carbon footprint and you figure out what to do, how do you organize? How do you take advantage of the political system to do that? We're at the highest level of insuredness in healthcare right now. We can either go forward or we can step back. That is really up to you to decide what to do. On immigration, we can either come together for some kind of solution that recognizes fairness in what's going on. That's really up to you. We still, the Harvey Weinstein issue has focused on the fact that women are still not comfortable in certain places in this society or feeling safe, and we have a chance to sort of move that ahead. And it is the same with racial issues that have come to a head across the country. So the question is, are you going to use what's given to you, the ability to change, the ability to write letters, the ability to organize other people, the ability to make an individual statement, to pick an issue and make sure that we leave this place better than the place we found it? And that is what civic engagement is all about, is using your opportunity in a democracy and for all your individual energy to make a change for better. So that's why it's really exciting that you're here today. And I just wish you luck. And I'm counting on seeing the things that you're going to do that are going to change this community for the better and keep a lot of things going. Good luck and really work at it.
We would like to open this up for questions and answers from you. So it can be to everyone or an individual elected. So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Oh, yes?
This is kind of just like an SLV-ish problem. I don't really know much about what's going on with like the water district and like everything that's going on with that, but like it's kind of just everything that's in the press banner. So I was wondering if you could kind of go like, what is it about? Like I don't want to look it up, but I just wanted to tell me. Thank you.
And we could actually open this up to a greater issue about press and what you read in the press and what you believe, what you shouldn't believe.
Yeah, 25 words or less. Let's see. It's a very pressing issue in the San Lorenzo Valley Water District. First of all, there's two things really that are going on that are pressing. There was a small Lompico Water District with 500 customers that was separate from the San Lorenzo Valley Water District with about 8,000. We put together an effort to have them merge, which they needed to do. They had to. Lompico was it just wasn't operating at all. We lost, and this is, I want to tell you how one vote counts. We had an election to merge them, and it lost by one vote. One vote, if it would have been flipped. So we said, no, we're not going to give it up. We're going to go to a different procedure, and did it, and it won, well, very, very handily by more than 2/3 of the vote. It needed a majority. That now has become a contentious issue between the two districts. Lompico thinks it's not getting what it was going to get. The San Lorenzo Valley Water District thinks it's giving them everything they wanted, and it's about how the priority list is and where Lompico sits on their capital improvements program. That's an oversimplification, but that's basically it. But then there was an issue where one of the members, former San Lorenzo Valley Water District director, his wife was a realtor, and they sold some property that his wife it was part of the district, and his wife was part of that. The district defended him and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars doing it, and they lost, but now there's that contentious moment. He wants them to continue defending him and take it up higher to the court level, and people in the district are just saying they're sick and tired of it. Why are you spending all this money defending this guy? Let's just move on. So those are two issues that are very contentious up in the San Lorenzo Valley on water right now.
And the other thing I will just add is that there is an effort for the San Lorenzo Valley Water District and the Scotts Valley Water District to work together to ensure that the groundwater, that you have sustainable groundwater systems in place to make sure that there will always be water in the San Lorenzo Valley. And so that's so there is contention, but there's also collaboration to figure out what our long-term needs are.
Anyone else? Okay. Any other questions? If not, I have a few of my own. Yeah. So I would like to know, supervisors, you are a body of 5. Assemblymember, you are a body of, what is it, 80? So how do you decide on tough issues? How do you come to a consensus on making a decision?
So I think the important thing is that there's 5 of us, and actually in the state constitution there's 5 of us in every county except for San Francisco, which is a city-county combination. But I can't afford, we may disagree on issues, but we have a very good working relationship because each one of us is 20% of the vote that the other person's going to need to make a difference in their district as well, right? So I represent Aptos and La Selva Beach and some parts of Capitol and into Watsonville, but so I think that the consensus word that Maureen used is very important because I don't think you see that right now at the national level, right? I mean, I think people feel like it's very contentious and very nasty, but at the local level, when there's just 5 people, we have to work together to come to an agreement because we might not be on the same side on this issue, but we're going to need the other person to come together on another issue, which I think is a great advantage of a body of just 5 members.
Does anyone here play sports? Okay, so politics in many ways is like sports in that there's a big competition, right, of elections every 4 years or 2 years where you have to go out and campaign, and it's very much like I'm going to go out and solve this problem and that problem. But then you get elected, and it becomes very much a team sport where it takes 3 of 5 at least on the Board of Supervisors to make any decisions. And you have to understand what your colleagues want, what the community wants, what's going on in their districts, and it becomes a much more collaborative effort to try to find solutions to problems. And sort of based on what Zach says, like at the national level, I don't get you what you want. You guys want free college. I can be like, well, I would give you free college, but the Republicans will never give you free college. At the local level, I can't say, oh, I would pick up your trash, but Bruce McPherson is not letting me pick up your trash. Nobody would believe that, right? So you, at the local level, you have to work together to get things done, because you can't just blame some distant people somewhere else. People expect you to solve the problems. They're the problems that you face every day in your communities. And so it's a really different way to work that can be really positive.
I think one part of it is that the element of partisanship is taken out of the County Board of Supervisors. It's a nonpartisan office, and as a matter of fact, I'm no party preference or declined to state. I think that's what the office is, and that's what the people want. So you don't get into that partisan bickering. And as a matter of fact, we can't, by law, talk to more than one of the other of us about an issue per se, or you violate the Brown Act to, in essence, coerce to say, hey, this is the way I'm going to go and this is the way we're going to do it. So there's that element in all levels of government where you have to watch out, or you just follow the rules of not discussing a particular issue with more than one of your other colleagues. But you make it clear, too, and I think that when I was elected to the Assembly, and the caucus had me in their first meeting, I was known, I'll probably be called the lib by one of these guys here pretty soon, but I made it very clear to my colleagues about this is where I stand and why I do, and it was particularly noticeable in some social issues, environmental issues, and educational issues. I just made it clear, and if you get into office and you are talking with one of your colleagues, tell them what you're for. And I would like to see us all emphasize what we're for and not so much what we're against. You can be against something and then say, no, I don't like that because this is what I think should be done. But I think we just are in the negative trend right now, unfortunately, and particularly in the federal level for one reason or other, and I'm not going to go into that. But let's just give it a positive, deliver your message on a positive manner as much as you can. Sir, you're going to be against something. I get it. But try to be positive in what you say and be clear of where you stand and why you're there.
The only thing I'll add is it's okay to disagree. I mean, we're 5 different people up here. We're all different people, and you have to do it respectfully, because in a community, you want to try to reach that consensus, but we all may choose different ways in which to get there. So on the County Board of Supervisors, the 4 of us up here, we're all 4 different people. We may choose to do things 4 different ways, but we represent the districts that we come from, but we work for everybody in Santa Cruz. So at the end of the day, what happens on an item at the board, we have to think not only about in my first district hat, but also in my Santa Cruz County hat, and that's generally worked pretty well. And this board is remarkable in the way in which we respect each other's opinion, and we generally agree on most things. And when we disagree, it's never the same group of people who agree or disagree. There's interesting breaks there because we're 5 different people.
So from 5 to 80, or is it 79? I can't remember.
You should know. You guys have it so easy because they have to count to 3 and they can pass anything they want. I have to count to 41 in my house, 21 in the Senate, and then talk the governor into signing it. Otherwise, nothing happens. In the legislature, there are probably, because every policy goes through committees, and then to one house and then the other. So there are probably 10 points at which one needs a yes to advance policy. Any no, and that policy is dead for that session. It's much more complicated, and it's a little bit harder, and something that John said is really very important. Do we represent our districts? Same thing at the state level. Or do we represent issues across the entire state? And here you have 4 here in front of you. county supervisors that have a broader sense of their obligation to the county. The state level, not always so much. People sometimes can't get out of their district or just can't get out of the bubble that Sacramento is. Although the Brown Act was mentioned, and I want somebody to ask them a policy question and watch them squirm, because they really can't talk policy with any more than two in the room at the same time unless it's a publicly noticed meeting. And one of the things that Zach was just chiding me about, of course, the legislature makes rules for local government. We make rules for ourselves. Do we make more lenient rules for ourselves than we do for local government? What do you think? Yeah. It's self-serving, and it's a problem. And if you've been reading the newspapers about all of the sexual harassment, sexual assaults that are coming out now in Sacramento, and the secret settlements, I've been trying to run bills to prohibit secret settlements like that. No wonder I can't get it through the legislature. There's a lot of self-interest up there, which we have to really watch out for. It becomes a lot more apparent at this level. And then something that Bruce said, over the last 5 years that I've been in the legislature, and a lot of dynamics in some of the rules that we operate under, the term limits and things have really changed. And the Democrats, I'm a Democrat, are in a supermajority. And so the Republicans are a smaller and smaller group. But yet, probably in the last 40 years, we have not done more on a bipartisan basis than we're doing right now. Because there's a growing sense of what's right, that the more perspectives you have on the table as you're having a conversation about policy, the better that policy is going to be. And that's something that brings California a lot of strength. And it's not that we disagree. We're supposed to disagree. It's how we disagree. And if we disagree productively and in a way that adds to the conversation, or if we disagree by standing on a soapbox and taking shots, personal shots and sniping, two very, very different outcomes. And there's still legislators who do that, and they don't get much policy done. And even the Republicans who do that aren't favored by their own party. And so we're learning how to govern in the state of California and doing a much better job than what's going on the national level. And those of us who came from local government understand that a lot better than those who didn't. And the more you engage you are in your community and engaged in the decision-making process, the stronger those decisions are, because you're building a bigger base for whatever that decision is. And that's why decisions in Santa Cruz are going to be different than decisions in Orange County, as Secretary Laird points out, because there's different political will and different policies. And for this group here, Santa Cruz Board of Supervisors has a very different political will than other parts of the state. And they've done some things that are absolutely remarkable when it comes to criminal justice and juvenile justice, health, human services. And I keep hearing from my colleagues, oh, you can't do that. That'll never get done. And I have to say, come to Santa Cruz, because of the collaboration and their willingness to work with the community and step out and make tough decisions. That sets a different standard that then becomes a model for other parts of the state. And that's what can happen with a collaborative group.
Thank you. And, oh, very good.
So what exactly do the county supervisors do? Like, what do you affect?
Well, the County Board of Supervisors is in some ways like a city council, right? So we're a land use authority. We take care of parks, police services, public works, your roads, just like they would in a city. We cover, for those services, it's all the areas in Santa Cruz County that are outside the 4 cities. In addition, counties also take care of the health and human services programs in the county. So whether that be child protective services or environmental health or our water resources, that is something that the county is responsible for, as well as the correction system. So the county jail we're responsible for. So it's like a super city council. We can do things that affect the cities around health and human services issues, sometimes, but land use, public works, those are going to just be in the unincorporated area.
I think that pretty much says it all, but also that you're more of a do-it-all or address-it-all in the county board of supervisors level. In the legislature, as Mark was mentioning, the process of going through committees and all, you're usually assigned to 5 or 6 or 5 committees, and that's where you really focus your attention. You have more focus in some sense, even though there's 2,500 bills a year introduced in the legislature that go through that process, but you vote on things when they come to the floor, but you focus on those that the committees that you represent when you're in the legislature. In the county board of supervisors, it covers it all.
Yeah, I think it's all been covered. Is there another question over here? Is there someone else? Yeah.
Okay, my question is, what is, like, individually, like, in your districts, and I guess countywide, what would you say is the most, I wouldn't say important issue, but, like, I guess most pressing issue you're dealing with, and what are you doing about it? Not, like, in a mean way, but what are you doing about it?
Your most pressing issue.
I think that one of the most pressing issues in the entire county is housing and affordable housing, and as a result of that, homelessness and issues around homelessness. You have to earn $70,000 a year to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Santa Cruz County. $70,000 a year. Think about that for a second. Which is about twice the national median income. And it's higher than the local median income, for that matter, by a significant amount. And so, we as a board collectively have said that we're willing to change things in order to allow more housing to get built. It's a complex problem, right? And it's hard to build things in Santa Cruz County. People are resistant to change, understandably. It's a beautiful area, and people don't want that to change. But look, I look at all of you, and I just told you $70,000 to afford a rental, right? I mean, how many of you think that you're going to go off to college and come back and be able to afford a house here? Honestly. Okay, that's about the right number, 0. So we have a responsibility, and the state, by the way, and we owe a lot to Mark on this, has done a lot more in the last legislative session than probably in some respects in the history of the state legislature to do this. But we are doing a lot of things on housing, but I would argue that housing and homelessness, which are very closely tied, there are a lot of pressing issues, but for me, I think housing and homelessness are really right up toward the top of the list.
Stand up. No. Okay. So for the homelessness issue, I know that like tampons and pads are a luxury item. And I have like spoken to homeless women in Santa Cruz who have literally not eaten on the week that they had their periods because they had to spend what little money they had on those things instead of food. And I just want to know what you're doing about that, if you can do anything about that.
Let me start from the state perspective a little bit on that to show you differences in perspectives, because I know this group is more sensitive to the needs of the homeless. But there was a bill this last year that would have said that feminine products would not carry a sales tax, for example, which seems like an easy thing to do, kind of a no-brainer. In the Women's Caucus in the legislature, this was one of their high priorities, and that got vetoed. So there's a real lack of understanding of what people need and how we connect the dots on some of the basic needs. And at the local level, we can drive, and I'm hoping that more will be done at the local level, because that sets the stage for the state level, because we're not able to quite always do the same things we can at the local level. But I think we need to rethink what basic needs are. Yes, it's housing, but we need to expand sort of what that perspective is to provide people what they need when they need it, and truly need it, in order for them to have at least some basic quality of life, and then connect them with the services that ultimately they need to help them in their circumstances. Most of the homeless issues are at the local level. The state's been trying to put money on the table, because a few years ago the state took money away, to put money on the table to let local jurisdictions make the right decisions for their communities.
Yeah, I think just to sort of talk to the question about sort of what do we do, on the homeless issue, this is something we're all really focused on. And one of the things to recognize, I think, when we talk about homeless, we're all thinking about that guy who sits on the mall, or that's the homeless person. But in fact, there's probably 12 different categories of homeless people who all have totally different needs, right? There's farm workers in South County, there's families and young children who are homeless, there's young adults who are homeless, there are people with mental illness, there are people with substance abuse, there are people just traveling through. It's a wide variety, and each one of those populations requires a different solution and different set of treatment. And so what we've been trying to do is identify those different populations and then come up with funding to get people first housed, because we can provide them, we do provide them with meals and we provide them with medical care and those sorts of things. But until somebody's housed, trying to then stabilize their lives is really hard, right? Like, so getting somebody drug treatment and then having them graduate and be homeless the next day, it's not going to be surprising that they're going to have to struggle with drug treatment in a couple weeks, because they're dealing with the elements. And so what we're trying to do is align services, get people the right services at the right time, and then align all the services in order to get them the best opportunity. But it's extremely difficult when people who are working and making really good livings can't afford to live here. The idea that we're going to be able to find places for 3,000 homeless people in Santa Cruz County is really is a big, big challenge.
Yeah, and I would say and I know, John, a big unit of the homeless came from around the city of Santa Cruz and downtown, and now they're on the riverfront, the bench lands that we have, and they'll be there until the rains come, and then it's 3 feet under, and then I don't know where they're going to go. But this is a problem that is everywhere. Everywhere you go, you've heard about it. And we are trying to really get to it. I think that one of the best ways that we can help the homeless is to address their medical needs. When people have gone down there to try to treat them and and prevent the problems like the hepatitis A that much of you have heard about or read about, I'm sure, we need to address those. And it's primarily, I don't, not to categorize them, but it's primarily a drug problem that a lot of these folks have. And we need to see what we can do to get them off that, and then they can get on the track to owning a house and be productive parts of our society.
I would say for the women here today, it is, I'm sure it's slightly dispiriting to see 5 guys up here. And so a question about feminine products to 5 guys, I think my colleagues have done a good job to sort of tell what we are doing at a state and local level. I just want to also share that we're very sensitive, especially to the issue of women. Just this year, the sheriff commissioned a report on the issues of women in incarceration. It was called Gender Matters. And our board did a 2-hour study session to try to take a look at what those issues were, because the issues of women in our county jail are different than the issue of men in our county jail. And we've just created a justice and gender task force to sort of take a look at whether we need to have some gender-specific policies so we can stop sort of a revolving door of women in our county jail. Women are, since the change of prison realignment back in 2010, we've seen an increase in the number of women in our jail. The issues that they face are different. The statistics are startling about the challenges they face. And we need to create policy at a local level to ensure that we're actually not contributing to the trauma of the criminal justice system, and work to strengthen families so we can keep people out of keep women out of the criminal justice system and keep families together. And so I just share that because I wanted you to know that as a board, the Board of Supervisors is 5 guys. And I think we see it as a responsibility that we look at issues that affect more than just the 5 men up there, but the women in our community, people of color, and children. So I just wanted to share that with you because I think it's emblematic of how we have to look at lots of different issues.
We have a question here.
Do you guys care if I ask about state legislature? No? Yeah? Is that okay? What do you guys think about, or did you guys have a hand on SB 239, the bill on? The one where it lowers knowingly transmitting AIDS or HIV from a felony to a misdemeanor?
Yeah. There are a number of laws in the state of California that have been built on emotion, and that was one of them. There are transmitting STDs, knowingly transmitting any kind of a disease or something that's harmful is already against the law. But there was this big stigma, and too bad John Laird's not here, that has been built up around AIDS and HIV over the years. And the level of that crime is the highest of anything and completely unjustifiable. And so this was the first time that what we did was reset the transmission of AIDS and HIV to the same level as any other disease or any other harmful effect that gets passed from one to the other, trying to take the emotion out of what had created that situation. We also did the same thing this year around sex crimes, because right now there's a whole spectrum of sex crimes, but it's hard for us to talk about that, and it's hard for us to distinguish those. And politically, oh my gosh, sex crime, end of story, send them away forever and ever and ever. And we register everybody, and we have created a system of bias and a system of stigma that makes absolutely no sense. And so for the first time this year as well, and this is the same kind of a category of things, is we're trying to rationalize, take the emotion out, and put a reasonable system of accountability in place based on the severity of it and the AIDS, HIV. And that was run by Senator Scott Wiener, who's a gay man out of San Francisco, and is something that was very, very important to him. We do have a growing gay and lesbian number of legislators, and that's really changed our ability to have conversations about queer issues in the legislature. We have a declining number of women, however. So for all the girls in here, I want you to think of politics as a real opportunity to have a voice, because again, just like with having gay legislators, lesbian legislators, that allows us to do more than we would otherwise. When we lack any particular voice in the legislature among 80, 40 in the Senate, that's 120 legislators. When we lack a particular voice, we lack a healthy perspective. And so that's what just happened this last year. The governor signed that. So we changed the penalties around transmitting AIDS and HIV. So the question is should driving without a suspended license be depends on the circumstance, but yeah, potentially. And again, we didn't take away penalties for it. We made penalties for transmitting HIV similar to other STDs, and so it's a similar amount of relative harm and a similar amount of punishment. There are always going to be within, this is one of the things we're trying to do, there are not rational bases for different levels of punishment. So if you grab a punishment out of this part of the code and a punishment out of that part of the code, I promise you're going to find inequities. And that is something that we are trying to address. There are people who go away for life terms, for smaller levels of crime, and those because they're negotiated sentences, who have committed a similar or more of a crime and actually have less of a punishment. There's some real inconsistencies in punishments and in how we address that, and that is something that is ongoing. It's one of the reasons we're looking at bail reform right now.
Supervisor Leopold?
Well, I just wanted to add that one of the things that I think that we've had a better understanding is there's so much in criminal justice, which is really a public health issue. My colleagues refer to issues around homelessness and other issues that we want to deal with, the core public health issues. But when we look at this at the penalties around HIV, they were created in a time where people were really scared. I ran a campaign in 1988 against two AIDS measures that were on the statewide ballot. I was the county coordinator here, and they were cynical attempts by politicians to use people's fear of the AIDS epidemic. This is the late 80s, where we didn't know a lot, to advance their political careers and make terrible laws. We were successful in defeating the mandatory reporting of partners when someone was diagnosed with HIV, because that is bad public health policy. You need to gain trust, you need to be able to talk with people, and you need to be able to promote safe sex practices within the entire community instead of penalizing and driving people away from getting tested. This was a big issue in the 80s and 90s, and I'm really glad to see that the legislature is taking some action to turn back the clock on some of these pieces, because they were terrible attempts to create policy based on fear rather than science. And we need more of that in the state legislature and in Congress.
I have a question. What impact do you, I'm sorry, is there somebody who had a question? Because we're here for you first.
If we do want to go into government and politics later in life, either after high school or after college, are there any tips for becoming involved in creating a name for ourselves into the political world?
That was my question. Amazing.
Well, if you follow a route similar to I do, being involved with your community and working on local issues, you'll be able to best understand what's going on in your community, and that will provide lots of leadership opportunities. And you'll build relationships that can help propel you to office. And so just working together is the best thing that you can do, and identifying issues that you care about, and you can find others that care about, and try to make that change, whether it be a school policy, a city or county policy, or state or federal policy. It's that you'll learn all the analytical skills that you need. You'll develop the relationships that will become important, and you'll be able to identify the opportunities that, if you choose to be an elected official, that'll present itself.
I think to get involved in something, as I said earlier, that identify yourself with the cause. I mean, and be sincere about it, obviously, or you wouldn't spend the time and effort to do it. But you need to get involved, and I think if you do get into a campaign, my advice is don't have a list of 20 things that you want to explain, because people start rolling their eyes after number 5 or 6. Just get a focus on what you really want to do, and then you can expand that too. There are plenty of opportunities for public service here, and realistically, not very many are going to be elected to public office. I mean, there's almost 40 million, 39 million people in the state of California now. We've had probably just in the low thousands or hundreds of people who have served in the state senate or state assembly. So if you don't get there, don't feel like you've failed. I just would pursue your effort of public service, of what interests you, and identify yourself with what you're interested in, so if you do run for office, people will know about it.
The best part about politics is it's so easy to get involved because so few people do, that you, just by showing up and getting involved in an issue or finding a candidate that you support, go out and you walk some neighborhoods for them or seal some envelopes, and I guarantee you all of us remember everyone who's ever showed up to seal an envelope for us. And if those people show up and say, now I want to get involved, or I want to be on a commission so I can start to think about running, we're always happy to help. And so that, it's probably what he'll talk about, but so at the local level, you can do that. And even at the national level, where Zach has showed up on presidential campaigns, started as a volunteer and ends up being a communications director for Barack Obama in a state, right? And so as long as you show up and you work hard, you can really get active and make a big difference.
Be willing to say yes when other people say no. Be willing to step up when no one else is willing to step up. And I guarantee you'll be noted by your community for those things. As Ryan mentioned, one of the things that I believe that we lament most in our elected world is how few people participate in the process. And we are constantly trying to ensure that the policies we make are actually representative of the community's desires and best interests. And the easiest way to know that is when there's the greatest level of participation. But right now at the local, state, and national level, that isn't necessarily the case. And as Ryan mentioned too, I have found in my own personal life, having started, as he had mentioned, on a campaign in 2004 for then, it eventually became John Kerry's campaign, the presidential campaign. I started at an exceptionally low level, and in the case of just a few months, by working hard, ended up in a deputy national director level at the Democratic National Committee, and because people notice, because you're willing to say yes, and you put in the hours, and you volunteer, and you commit, and as a result of that, I've worked on a number of national presidential campaigns, but that's how you can do it. There's no magic formula other than being willing to do it. It turns out most people don't want to do it. They just actually don't want to put in the work. They don't want to say yes, and they don't want to stand up for things that even though you know they are right, sometimes they're hard, right? Your peer networks aren't engaged or interested in the issue. You've got to be willing to do that, and if you do, you'll guarantee. The fact that you even asked the question, though, shows me already that you're there. So let us know how we can help that way.
So the one thing that the five of us have in common, and the only thing that ultimately matters, is that we each got at least one vote more than 50% of those who voted in that election. So it's that simple. It's really that simple. It's not. It's a matter of how do you get out there, how do you make your case to the voters? And you make that case to the voters. And some of my colleagues are not that much older than you are. They're in their early 30s. I have one colleague who was first elected to the Assembly at the age of 27. He was able to make the case to the voters. But you do that by building your connections within the community and getting people to know you and trust the work that has been done, what you say, what you stand for, and that show that you're willing to do the work. And that's the path.
So, yes, thank you. If you'd like to move in a little closer, that would be great, but we have our mic, we'll do our best. So this session is about county governance. My name's Cynthia Mathews. I'm just the moderator. I serve on the Santa Cruz City Council. Our featured speakers will be members of our County Board of Supervisors. Just a very quick intro. Our County Board of Supervisors are elected by districts, so each supervisor represents a geographical district. They're elected for 4-year terms. They serve someone to serve as their chair. Each year it's someone different. They oversee a huge budget that has to do with infrastructure, with parks and open spaces, with healthcare and human services. It's a vast department. So each supervisor tries to be attentive to the issues of their district and also keep in mind the needs of the entire county. So with that, I'm going to introduce them and ask them to give a brief background about what led them, introduce themselves, and what led them to run for public office. And we do want to save time for questions, so try and keep it maybe to 5 minutes, something like that. First of all, Bruce McPherson.
Hi, I'm a fourth-generation Santa Cruz County native, and my family has always been involved in public service. And my family did own the Santa Cruz Sentinel for 118 years. I was not there the whole time, but I was there for 26 of those years, and the news side of the newspaper, and editor for 10. I just learned from my family and their friends about the value of public service. And I'll tell you that when you give to public service and helping others, you're going to feel better than they do, because you can see the difference. And there's so many things that you can do to help others here in Santa Cruz County. I was, after that tenure in the newspaper business, I retired sort of, and then the sitting assemblyman, Sam Farr, Leon Panetta, first of all, the icon of politics in this region, became the budget director under President Clinton before becoming his chief of staff. The sitting assemblyman, Sam Farr, ran for that office. Some people, and he won, and some people said, "Hey, Bruce, you can do this." And at that time, I was a Republican. I'm not now. I'm no party preference. And they said, "You're the only one that can win in this district." And I started to believe them, and we won in a special election. Was reelected to the Assembly, and then elected twice to the state Senate, and then retired from politics, I thought. Then the Secretary of State, sitting Secretary of State, got into some problems and resigned, and Governor Schwarzenegger nominated me to be Secretary of State of California, which I was for 2 years and was confirmed unanimously by both the Senate and the Assembly. So that's my political career, and then had retired, so to speak. And then Mark Stone, who was just with us in the last group, ran for the Assembly, and he is a tremendous Assembly member representing our district now. And some people said, "Bruce, why don't you've got some background knowledge in how these things are done. Why don't you run for county supervisor?" And I did, won 5 years ago, and then was reelected, representing the 5th district of a small part of Santa Cruz, almost all of Scotts Valley, and the entire San Lorenzo Valley. And I love it. I love serving in the county level equally as much as I did in the state level.
Thank you. Yeah, I represent District 4, which is most of Watsonville, all the way to Aromas, up to Mount Madonna, Santa Clara County line. And District 4 is different than the rest of the county. How many go to PV High or Watsonville High? So we got quite a few. And you know the issues that go on there. We have one of the highest costs of living in the United States in Santa Cruz County. And at the same time, in District 4, we have one of the lowest income per capita in the United States also. So we're dealing with a lot of agriculture land, trying to protect that. That's a big, $700 million $700 million that is brought in through the ag industry and in the county. And we have to protect our prime ag land. Just give you an example. It costs, if somebody owns some land and they want to rent out their farmland, it's about $2,500 to $2,700 an acre for a farmer to rent out his land and have it cultivated. Okay? You go out to other areas, we'll go to San Benito County. How much to rent an acre out there in San Benito County? About $600 an acre, $700 maybe. What's the difference? It's the soil. The soil in South County, District 4 and District 2, is some of the richest soil in the entire world. So it's got like 30 to 40 feet of topsoil, because over the years, hundreds of years, flooding, rains, and everything, all the topsoil from the mountains washed down and filled in the Pajaro Valley. So it's prime land, we need to protect it. It's not just the farm workers working out there. You have packaging, you have shipping, you have truck drivers, you have a tremendous amount of scientific work going on trying to make the growth of strawberries, we'll take for example, and trying to figure out, we have about over 100 employees right now in South County that are dealing with the issues of ag land.
Greg,
so,
I think that's been a good introduction
you
to
bet.
an issue of concern to you, and let's have John do his introduction.
You bet. I was only going to go another half hour. So anyway, that's okay.
Well, hello, my name is John Leopold. I'm a county supervisor representing the 1st District, which is Live Oak, Soquel, Santa Cruz Gardens, all the way up to the Summit. And I got involved with politics when I was 14. My hometown was Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. There was a nuclear power plant there, and in 1979, it almost melted down. And that's when I realized that I need to get involved with community organizing. I had to educate myself about an issue, started working with others, and I've worked on doing community organizing activities throughout the rest of my life. And it's the reason why I'm a member of the Board of Supervisors is because that seemed the most logical extension of that work of doing community organizing, whether it be around environmental issues, healthcare issues, civil rights issues, or just local development issues. So if you care about your local issues, you can one day be standing up here as well.
And I'm Zach Friend. I'm also a county supervisor. I represent an area that includes basically Capitola down to Monterey County line on the coastal side, so Aptos, La Selva, part of Watsonville, and all of Corralitos. And as opposed to giving you my life story, I actually want to hear your questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to the moderator so we can get straight into your questions.
Thank you. And so let's hear what questions you have for our county supervisors. Yes. That's a really good question.
Not a dumb question. As you heard, the dumbest question is, what do you guys do? And we do really, having been in the state, as I mentioned, we do comparatively everything. We address every type of issue that you can imagine, from health services, which was mentioned, human services, water issues, although we're not a purveyor of the water, but we, parks, law enforcement, the sheriff's office, we do everything. Comparatively, in the state legislature, when you're one of 80 members in the Assembly or one of 40 members in the State Senate, you are assigned to committees, and your focus of probably 5 committees, and that's where your focus of attention is. Whether mine was education, public safety, and environmental protection. Those are the things that I really wanted to target, because there's so much that goes on in the state legislature. There's 2,500 bills introduced every year or more. And so that's the way the things are divided within the caucuses, the Democrat and Republican caucuses up in Sacramento. But here we address everything imaginable, and sometimes you can't imagine what it is, but it's just every subject matter in public service that we address at one type or another. The homeless housing issue is huge at this time. The cannabis implementation that's going to be becoming alive, and we have to set standards, and we really wanted local control, as each of the 58 counties in the state did. That's been maintained, and I think we, as a county on that issue, and many others too, are ahead of the curve on that and how we're going to implement that and make it work to the best of our abilities.
I'm going to interrupt. I think your question is, what do they do on a day-to-day basis? Was that? I will say, unlike the city councils who don't have direct staff who work for them individually, each county supervisor has a couple of aides who work for them, and in any given day, they'll be going to meetings with constituents, they'll be directing their staff, they'll be participating in collaboratives. So I think just in terms of they have priority issues, but how do you get that work done? I don't know if that was your question. So maybe, Greg, a quick answer, and then we'll hear.
I will. I'll make it short. It goes. We have a Watsonville office and we have a Santa Cruz office. For South County, it's a lot easier for people to visit our office, call us there, and make an appointment. So we spend a lot of time in South County. But what are the issues? What are the phone calls? We probably get about, I'd say about 15 phone calls a day. They can be as important as the Pajaro River, keeping that from flooding. We're working on a 100-year plan on that. It could be building a bridge over on Casserly Road that was washed out during the storm. And then it could be as small as a pothole in somebody's front yard, and they want it fixed. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is a big deal if you have to, drive over that pothole every day. I'll give you a quick example and I'll pass it on. One person called up and said, look, there's a manhole cover on the street. Every time a car goes by, hits it with their tire, it goes clank, clank. I'm going crazy. I hear it all night, I hear it all day, clank, 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 all right? So it sounded like an easy project. We put in a new manhole cover, it still clanked. And it's because of the way the circumference is. We went down to the yard there in the city of Watsonville. They have a bunch of old ones, and we found one that actually fit and doesn't clank anymore. So there you go. It was real important to that guy living there. Okay.
We don't call him Mr. Manhole for nothing. There, on any given day, there's a mixture of policy, advocacy, community work. So just yesterday, spent a number of hours in a regional transportation commission meeting talking about trains, automobiles, the highway, a whole bunch of things. Then right from there, I went to meet with a community group to talk about an ordinance that I'm going to be bringing to the board around alcohol and trying to talk over with community members about what they wanted to see and what they cared about. Then later in the day, Supervisor Friend and I got to participate in a sanitation district meeting where we looked at the master plan for our sanitation system in the county. And then I capped off the evening with 90 members of a neighborhood talking about traffic issues. So you get to do a lot of different things during the day, and you end up reading, I think we read probably at least 1,000 pages a week for the different boards or commissions or committees that we serve on.
I've never fixed a manhole for somebody, but I'm glad somebody in the county is doing it for the rest of us. But I mean, so it really does depend upon the district that you represent. If you represent a city, as Greg does, then a lot of the day-to-day work's actually handled by the city council, like Lowell Hurst, who's here. If you represent the unincorporated areas, John, Bruce, and myself do, we are your first point of contact for every need that you may have with the government, right? So we hear from a lot of people that have everything from a need for the sheriff's office, or maybe it's a road issue, or maybe there's a house that's being built next to them that's too high, or maybe they have a vacation rental they don't like, or whatever. And the long-term stuff that John just mentioned, transportation planning, air pollution issues, climate change. These are all things that we're working on at a local level. So it can be as small as the pothole and as large as how are we going to address climate change from a local perspective for the next 50 years, or things that the board actually works on. It was a great question.
More than half the revenue we get, or we spend, more than half the money we spend is from federal and state sources, and we have to follow their directives. We are agents of, particularly the states, but the federal government will give you some money if you do this. I think the best government's local. I think it's more responsive, but that's the way the system works. Just over half of our revenue, though, comes from state and federal sources.
Let's get another question here. So I think the question was, what is the county doing to deal with the issues of economic disparities? Is that what I'm going to let Zach start, so it's not always.
Well, I also share a section of the South County with Supervisor Caput, and just to paint a picture, right, we represent areas with the highest unemployment in the county, and John is right behind us in a section of Live Oak, actually, that he has. But within my district, I have both the highest and lowest unemployment rates in the county, in my district. So think about that. I have a 4% unemployment rate in Aptos, and there's a section that I represent in Freedom that has 27% unemployment. We have people who earn less than half of the median income of the United States in our district. And yet we live in an area that you have to earn $70,000 a year to afford a 2-bedroom apartment here. So we recognize that disparity. You hear about all the income inequality across the country and how fortunate we are to live here. It's happening right here. I mean, there is no question there's a massive inequality right here in Santa Cruz County. And I think we have very open, transparent conversations about it, even for some of the supervisors that don't represent that same level of inequality. I really do believe that they, on transportation issues and housing issues, and even where we will locate economic development within the county, really do try to ensure that that opportunity changes moving forward. So I want you to know this is something that we talk about very seriously and are very cognizant of. I'll pass it on to John.
There's several different ways in which we work on this issue, because we are very aware of it. Some of it is through policy. When the state took away funding for affordable housing, we decided to charge an affordable housing impact fee on new development. When we recognize that that what happens in the first couple of years of life, or the first 3 years of life, have a huge impact on brain development, our board voted to create a Thrive by 3 fund and start a nurse-family partnership program. In Live Oak, the community I represent, which is probably the most economically challenged part of my district, I started 4 years ago working on a programmatic response and worked to bring all the different organizations that were working in Live Oak to work together to figure out how we could support and strengthen families and ensure that everyone is successful from cradle to career. And it took about 2 years to get something going, but we have this program that we call Cradle to Career, which we try to leverage the collective impact of all these different organizations, whether it be the county Health and Human Services, whether it be the school district, whether it be the health center, whether it be the Family Resource Center, the Boys and Girls Club, the First Five Commission, to try to support not only those kids in the school, but also their families, because families will be more successful if they can be supported, if parents and children are supported. So it's a mixture of both policy and program that we try to do to close the gap of inequality that we have here in Santa Cruz County. Well, the question when what are we doing to improve the infrastructure with all the people moving in here? So many of us were involved in this past year in trying to secure a new funding source to deal with our streets and roads. You know, the county maintains a 600-mile road system, which experts say we need about $12 million a year to maintain. In our last fiscal year, outside of storm repair, we spent $1.5 million. So that's obviously inadequate. After many years of discussion, through our roles on the Regional Transportation Commission, we led an effort around Measure D, which was on the ballot last November, which was a half-cent sales tax that would go to, the largest chunk would go to our local streets and roads, a large chunk to the highway, large chunk for the rail corridor, and support for our bus system. And so for the first time since I've been in office, we're actually going to have a lot more money for the county. It's almost a 2.5 times increase in the amount of funding. The state legislature also passed this year SB 1, which was a huge transportation funding measure, which you're starting to see because it's funded by increasing the gas tax, the vehicle license registration fee, a special fee for electric cars, and some special fees for diesel. But that we expect that within 5 years will bring about $6 to $7 million more to the county road system. I'm not sure about the city, but you could start seeing we're getting a lot closer to that 12 that we need to maintain our infrastructure. The other thing that I'll just say is, as we look at increased development along our transit corridors, one of the issues we've been talking about as a board is how do we make sure that we have the infrastructure to support. If you're going to have a taller building, you need a wider sidewalk. You know, if you need to plan for all these pieces. So we're thoughtful as we create these plans to make sure that we have the resources to be able to support them.
I think actually the first thing that would be important to note is that we actually don't have that many people moving in here. It's very commonly believed that there's been this massive influx. When you look at the year-to-year growth in the county, it's actually very low, and it's generally below the state average in general. And the reason is it's exceptionally expensive and difficult to live here. But one thing that is true is over the last couple decades, nearly all of the not exclusively, but a lot of the housing growth has occurred in the south part of the county, specifically the city of Watsonville, yet most of the job growth has occurred in the city of Santa Cruz. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why we have traffic along Highway 1 in that situation, which is to say if you have everybody, the only place you can live is in the South County and all the jobs are in the North County, well, that's the corridor that's going to be problematic along SoCal Freedom and Highway 1. And so I think that on the infrastructure side, one thing that we don't discuss enough is its relationship with where the jobs are and where the housing is, right? It's true the roads are falling apart. It's true that the highway needs improvements. But if people lived closer to their job, they wouldn't need to use the infrastructure in the same way, right? So to see the problem in a greater context that way, to see the interrelationship between where people live and where the jobs are. And that's a problem going across the state where the affordable housing is generally further and further away from the job centers, where you have people having these issues. And the lack of investment on infrastructure, as you talk about, is a national problem. But we've been looking at that relationship, the interrelationship. So I think that's an important thing to note. It's easy to kind of blame it on outsiders or people coming in or moving in, and it's really, the data doesn't back that up. But land use decisions made by city councils and the Board of Supervisors over the last 3 decades have in part created a situation where you have a lot of jobs in one location and a lot of housing in another, and that becomes an issue on infrastructure.
Another key component of our infrastructure is water, which the county is not a purveyor. There's several water districts throughout the county. The city of Santa Cruz has its water system. It's hard to believe after last year's storm that we have a water problem here, but in the mid-county, the SoCal Creek Water District area, we're down there. They need to preserve their water as best they can. I see the same thing, not so much but somewhat in the Scotts Valley area where I represent. It is important that we coordinate our efforts to conserve our water. We do not get federal or state water sources coming into this county. We're one of the few that don't. We have Loch Lomond as a city water source that really brings in a lot of water to thousands of people. But to address this, the state, to partially address this, the state just passed legislation that by 2022 that counties or regions have a groundwater management program, which we are cooperating with the city of, in my district, the city of Scotts Valley, Mount Hermon, and some other water sources, the San Lorenzo Valley Water District, the Scotts Valley Water District, to register how much water is being used. We're doing this, we've got to do it in a cooperative manner and recognize that we've got to address this and keep tabs on how much water we're using for the betterment of all. So there are some efforts going, but that's a huge issue that's outside of the county government's jurisdiction per se, but we are involved, John Leopold and I, for instance, in the Santa Margarita groundwater management system that's board has just been, a joint powers authority has just been established to see how we can cooperate and have the best use of our water and manage it to the best of our abilities.
I was glad to hear, quick.
Real quick, I'll cut it short, but you know, jobs, schools, and also roads, right? When you mentioned the question, it was like, how do we deal with more people moving in and more stress on the infrastructure? Well, if you look at South County and if you took that out of the growth in the county in the last census, 2010, the county population would have actually dropped. We have one of the youngest populations per capita in the United States, right there in Watsonville. Our schools are full. That's part of infrastructure. We have to have schools for them. We have to have roads leading to and from the schools. So it's a tremendous stress. What we have to also watch out for is the middle class moving out, and we're going to have upper class income and lower class income and no middle class. That's where jobs come in, and that's where people want to work locally, and they don't have to put a lot of stress on the highway and everything like that.
I'm going to make just a couple of infrastructure questions, then we'll get a question from back there. I was glad. Did you have a question? Okay. Yeah, but I just want to make a quick comment. I'm glad to have an infrastructure question. It tends to be the ignored ingredient in a lot of other more hot button issues. But in terms of water, you may be aware that our water system here is entirely self-contained. Every time you turn on the tap, you're either drawing from wells, which have been overdrafted historically, both in South County and Mid-County, and I guess out in the Scotts Valley area, or rain, and that's it. And so we have to manage that very carefully. And there is, after our 4-year drought, much more state leadership, and there's also a groundwater agency for the Mid-County area, which Supervisors Friend and Leopold are on that. I represent the city, and there are a number of other districts. So again, really focusing on something that is staring us in the face for the future. We're under a state mandate and also just reality to come up with a solution. Also, it was mentioned, John mentioned this legislation that was passed increasing the taxes for transportation, but there's a movement now to get an initiative on the ballot that would repeal SB 1. And so we have been very much counting on that revenue to maintain our roads, to sustain our transit, to invest in new transportation. But, you know, you're going to have a chance, if that gets on the ballot, you're going to have a chance to vote on it. Do I want to vote for the resources necessary to maintain and improve our local transportation infrastructure or not? So that, you know, if someone's asking for your signature in front of a grocery store, ask them what it's about. Is it something you want to support? So I think in the orange shirt you had a question? Yeah. Question, who represents Corralitos?
Great. We split that section, but just so you know, so Hazel Dell, for those of you who don't like to get out much, is a road that was in bad shape before the storms and now is actually in some respects catastrophic shape post the storms. And Greg and I have worked together very closely on this with our state representatives and federal representatives, and we did secure, as the county worked hard on this, federal funding for it. And it's actually one of the priority projects for the county and will actually be repaired next year, meaning 2018, which is very fast for the kind of government work we do, and it will actually be in better shape than it was before the storms, which is an important thing to note. But it is a rural road, and it was in bad shape. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I mean, part of this road is literally collapsed in some parts into the ravine on the side, and it's dangerous to even have one car driving on it, nonetheless two. But that's something we've worked together on and shows the need for collaboration because we have either sides of the street functionally on Hazel Dell and how we represent it moving up.
Your local government you saw your local government being responsive, but very much relying on the state and federal resources, collaborating and taking time for the solution to happen, a common theme.
I've been out there as recent as about 2 weeks ago. We have a work order, but the money and the funding, it goes on priorities. Of course, where more people live, they're going to get a higher priority. But Hazel Dell is a definite problem. People can be actually trapped up there during the storm. I believe, do you live up in that area? Yeah, so you had to go way out and around in order to, instead of going on a 10-minute commute, you had to go on about a half-an-hour commute. We realized that, and we are working on it. It's the dividing line between his district and mine. In some ways, that's good. It gives us 2 votes on trying to get something done out there. But I know you're talking about by the Estrada Ranch and all of those out there. Yeah, we're looking at it very closely. I can't promise you it'll be fixed right now, but it will be fixed.
I think we got time for one more question, and I saw a hand up over.
The question was, what reason are some of these conservative legislators in the state legislature, why do they want to have a referendum to kill Senate Bill 1 or SB 1? Because they say it's a new tax and it wasn't approved by the whole state in essence. And so they're trying to get the number of signatures to put on the ballot to qualify it, and then if a majority of the voters say yes to that, then we repeal it. Then we lose our tax structure, which is statewide, it's $5 billion a year. Now, I don't know who likes to pay taxes, but if you want your roads fixed, you're going to have to pay for it. What?
It is.
It's a tax. It's 12-cent sales tax on gasoline, 20 on diesel. Then there's some fee structures different depending on your value of your car and vehicle registration. And is it $75 on electric vehicles? $75, $125, $100 on. So those were all put into effect. And this took, and I'll tell you, local governments throughout California. Our county is a member of the County State Association of Counties, League of California. We really pushed for that because we know the value of that. And another part of that is that when we passed Measure D last November, the legislature did this late in the session this year, we became what was called a self-help county. That means we have helped ourselves by taxing ourselves to have road improvements. When you're there, you're one of 24 out of 58 counties, and the state will help you in granting funds to your projects because you're helping yourself. So it's a very important element of that the whole picture. But if they're, well, I don't know. I don't want to apologize.
It's the weeds, and you know we have to break up. I'll give you one more sec, Greg, but we're going to have to break up. Our time has concluded, but I know many of the panelists here would love to talk to you immediately after or during lunch. So I hope you have another question. And I just want to make a final comment. Local government is extremely accessible. The supervisors have offices. They have staffs. You can email, you can call, you can convey your issues to them. So you'll have many other chances to communicate. Quick one?
Closing remark, real quick?
No.
We're not doing the closing words.
Okay, real quick. If you're going to get gas in your car, get it before next week. It's going to go up 12 cents a gallon. It went up? It went up recently. Okay, and the other thing would be with your schools, we're working on trying to get those schools open. They're building fences, locking you out. Neighborhoods want to use playgrounds. They want to use schools. Taxpayers paid for them. I'm saying open up those gates, tear down those fences around your schools. People use them. They use the playgrounds. You go and play catch or pick up football games or whatever. So those are school issues. And lastly, the big game tonight is Watsonville High against PV High. I'll see you there.
So I want to thank you all for being here today. I want to thank the volunteers and organizers and the people who put this on. What a great event.